All right, kiddos, today we're going to discuss kingdom Animalia, which is in the eukarya domain. So if we want to look at that the way we're used to looking at it, you can see that we are in the eukarya domain. We've already discussed protists, we've already discussed fungi, and now today we're going to work in the animal kingdom. And next week we will do the plant kingdom. So we're going to discuss several different phyla. P-H-Y-L-A is the plural form of the word phylum. Phylum right here is singular. We're going to discuss several different phyla within the animal kingdom today, and I've actually created a concept map that breaks down the one we're used to looking at a little bit further. We've got the domain eukarya. We've already covered kingdom protista. We've already covered kingdom fungi. Today we're going to do kingdom Animalia, or the animal kingdom, and next week kingdom Plantae. Breaking that down even further, here you can see the animal kingdom. A lot of scientists will informally separate animals into two subgroups. For one of them would be vertebrates, and the other would be invertebrates. These are not official categories within our classification system, but a lot of scientists informally separate animals into those that do have an internal skeleton and those that do not have an internal skeleton. So let's talk a little bit more about the difference between a vertebrate and an invertebrate. Vertebrates are animals such as humans, fish, birds that have an interior skeleton, or what we call an endoskeleton. The prefix endo means inside, and a backbone. So you can see this is an x-ray of a snake, and you can see that it definitely has an internal skeleton. Invertebrates, like insects and sea anemones and worms, those are animals that do not have an endoskeleton or interior skeleton or a backbone. So what is it that makes something an animal? All animals share these 6 characteristics. Animals are multicellular. They are eukaryotic, meaning their cells have membrane-bound organelles. They're heterotrophic. They digest food inside their bodies. They can reproduce sexually, and their cells do not have cell walls. So you might want to pause the video here for a second, put that in your notes or grab a screenshot, but these are the 6 characteristics that all animals, so all of the organisms in kingdom Animalia, these characteristics are what make you an animal. So the first phyla we're going to discuss within the animal kingdom would be, or the first phylum that we're going to discuss in the animal kingdom is phylum Porifera. These are the sponges. You might not guess that a sponge is an animal, but in fact a sponge is just as much of an animal as you, or a butterfly, or a tiger. But what makes a sponge an animal? Well, like all animals, sponges are multicellular and heterotrophic. Sponges belong to the phylum Porifera, which is a word derived from the Latin word for pore. It's a reference to the structure of a sponge's body, which allows the passage of water into and out of the body. Sponges use their pores to feed and reproduce. Most sponges live in the ocean, though many species live in fresh water. And sponges feed by filtering microscopic organisms from the water. And I'm going to switch over here to your lesson, page 5, and show you a neat animation of a filter feeding, or how sponges feed using a process called filter feeding. All right, so I'm in your course, lesson 3.07, and I am on, I think it's page 5, the sponges page. I'll have to check that in a second. Here you can see a sponge in the ocean, and you can see this is a magnification of the sponge. Here's the pore, the little holes on the outside of the sponge, and I gotta scroll up and down here. It's gonna get a little annoying, but I can do it. You can see that water carrying food particles enters the sponge through the pore. So water comes into the sponge. The water is carrying microscopic food particles. I'll click play, and you'll be able to see the magnification even further, and then the little tiny food particle coming in through the pore of the sponge. And I'll scroll back up. There we go. Inside the sponge, collar cells have flagella that move the water. Food particles get trapped on the collar of the collar cell. So if you press play, and you can actually kind of see it, there's a little stringy looking thing. This is called a flagellum, and it flaps back and forth, making a water current. It actually moves faster than that in real life. I don't know why they have it moving so slowly. And you can see the food get stuck on the collar of the collar cell. And then the food particles are brought into the collar cell by endocytosis, endo means in, forming a food vacuole, just like our protists would do, like the amoeba would do, although this isn't an amoeba. And then digestive enzymes in the food vacuole eventually digest the food particle. You can see the food particle starting to break down. And the collar cell is digesting the food. And then after the broken down molecules from the food particles are absorbed, the waste products are expelled from the collar cell by a process called exocytosis. Exo means to leave, and you can see the little waste products leaving the collar cell. And then we have the waste products being carried out of the sponge's body cavity by the flow of water out this opening at the top called the osculum. If you are scuba diving or snorkeling and you come across a grouping of sponges, you can actually see the water, the cloudy water flowing out of the sponge, sometimes carrying the waste products out of the sponge. So that whole process is called filter feeding in sponges, and I believe you can find it on page 5 in lesson 3.07. So the next phylum we are going to discuss is called phylum Cnidaria, C-N-I-D-A-R-I-A. The C is silent, and this phylum contains your jellies and your corals. Both of these are animals. They're in kingdom Animalia. Yes, even coral is considered an animal. Scientists try not to call these jellyfish. We try to call them jellies now because they're not fish at all. They are in the phylum Cnidaria. Fish are in a completely different phylum. So this phylum includes corals and sea anemones like Nemo lives in, and jellies. These animals belong to the phylum Cnidaria. The word Cnidaria comes from the Latin term nide or nettle, N-E-T-T-L-E, which is a plant with stinging hairs. Don't be fooled though, Cnidarians are animals, not plants. As the name suggests, Cnidarians are animals with specialized stinging structures, cell-sized weapons called nematocysts, or specialized cells that contain a harpoon-like structure and a nerve toxin. The structures help Cnidarians immobilize prey. Unfortunately, some Cnidarians, such as the box jellyfish, produce toxins that can be life-threatening if people come in contact with them. Structurally, a Cnidarian is a fairly simple organism. Its body is made up of 2 layers of tissue, and inside of its body is a simple digestive cavity. So I'm going to switch over again to your course, page 6, lesson 307, page 6, because I want to show you those stinging cells. Okay, so I want to show you a couple of terms here. Nematocysts, those are the stinging cells, the stinging structures that all Cnidarians have. They are harpoon-like, interestingly enough, and they inject into their prey a nerve toxin. So you can see here a jelly, not a jellyfish, although it's the same thing. We have a magnification of the jellyfish's tentacle and a tiny little food particle coming in. Tiny little piece of prey. And then here's the nematocyst, and here's the end of the nematocyst, looks like a harpoon. And so when you come in contact with a jellyfish, it feels like you're being stung, because you are, because it's injecting you with all these tiny little microscopic harpoon-like structures called nematocysts and injecting you with a neurotoxin. So that's why jellyfish hurt, and if they're big enough, like a box jellyfish, they can even kill you. All right, so I want to take a break here. We already did two phyla. We did the cnidarians and the sponge phyla, the poriferans. I want to take a break here and discuss something called body symmetry. Biologists care very much about body symmetry because it's a way of classifying organisms into different groups. It turns out that an animal's body plan and its symmetry provide clues about which phylum the animal belongs to and its evolutionary history. There are three kinds of body symmetry. The first one is called bilateral symmetry. It's symmetry around a single line. One side mirrors the other, like a human. The second type is called radial symmetry, which is symmetry around a point, like a sea star or a sea urchin. And then, of course, things like sponges are asymmetrical, meaning they don't have any symmetry. They're just kind of like a blob. So I want to show you a couple pictures. And you can probably tell that this is bilateral symmetry. If I were to draw a line right down the middle of Mr. Crab here, he would be a mirror image. He's got claw on the left, claw on the right, eye on the left, eye on the right. Same thing with us. We have bilateral symmetry. We have an arm on the left, arm on the right, eye on the left, eye on the right. So when you can draw a line right down the middle and you get a mirror image, like if you folded it over, you would end up with an organism that has bilateral symmetry. Now, if you are dealing with something that has radial symmetry, you start in the middle and you can actually draw like radii from the center, if you will, if you pretend it's a circle. Right? It has radial symmetry. Radial is radius. So something like a starfish has radial symmetry. And then if you take a look at this sponge over here, this sponge is more of a blob, right? There's no symmetry there at all. So that would be something that is asymmetrical. So we have bilateral symmetry, radial symmetry, and asymmetry for different types of body plans, and it helps biologists determine which category certain animals would fall into. So some of the animals that we're going to talk about now fall into that bilateral symmetry category, especially flatworms. If you look, you can take a flatworm and you can draw a line right down the middle of the flatworm and you get like a mirror image. Flatworms fall into the phylum Platyhelminthes. So if you notice, I didn't actually show you the classification system here, but from here on out, we're still talking about different phyla within the animal kingdom. So flatworms fall into the phylum Platyhelminthes. The simplest bilateral organism, remember that bilateral symmetry, is the flatworm. As the name suggests, flatworms have flat bodies. They don't have any true organ systems, and they rely on diffusion to deliver oxygen and other gases into and out of their cells. Some flatworms, such as the freshwater flatworm in the photo, are free-living, but many are parasites that live inside other organisms. Flatworms like flukes and tapeworms, you probably know what a tapeworm is if you've ever gotten a puppy in the family. They typically have tapeworms that you have to get rid of, can cause serious illnesses in humans and in other animals. In tropical locations around the world, the disease schistosomiasis is caused by flatworms that spend part of their lives inside snails and part of their lives inside humans. The worms can penetrate the skin of people wading in water. Where the worms live, once inside a person, they grow inside blood vessels and lay eggs that travel to the bladder or intestine. And if you want to learn more about parasitic flatworms, if you go to page 8 of your lesson, you can find a link that will take you to some more information about flatworms in the phylum Platyhelminthes. Next up, we have phylum Mollusca, the mollusks. I'm sure you've heard of mollusks. Mollusks can live in marine and terrestrial habitats. If you've ever been to the seashore, you've probably seen evidence of at least one major animal phylum, phylum Mollusca, the mollusks. Snails, clams, and mussels are mollusks, as are octopuses or octopi and squid. Most of these animals live in marine habitats, though some clams and snails live in fresh water. Some snails even live on land. All mollusks have a muscular foot, soft bodies, and gills that they use for breathing. They also have a rough feeding appendage called the radula, which they use to scrape algae off of rocks. Most mollusks are covered with a hard shell, though in some species, such as the squid, this shell is reduced to just a tiny structure inside the body. If you go to page 9 of your lesson, there is a nice little, or not an animation, but a nice little graphic of the general anatomy of a snail and a clam. So I'm going to switch over to that. And you can see here a little blurb about mollusks. They are invertebrates. They don't have a backbone. They don't have an endoskeleton. The outer layer of their body is covered by a fleshy layer of tissue called the mantle. You can see the mantle here in the picture here of the clam. Many mollusks use a muscular foot. You can see the big foot here on the snail. That's what you see usually when you see a snail crawling to move or dig. Clams even have a large foot. That's what you're eating when you eat the clam, or part of it anyway. And they use the foot to move. Clams can actually move. They don't move very quickly, but they will, move if they have to, if they can't find something to eat. So you can see here you've got your snail and your clam. Both of them are mollusks, and you can take some time on this page in your course to look at the anatomy of a mollusk. So this organism right here on the left is a nudibranch, N-U-D-I-B-R-A-N-C-H. You can find it on page 9 of your course. It's a mollusk with a greatly reduced internal shell. Of course, this here is a clam. A clam also is a mollusk known as a bivalve because it has two shells that are hinged together. And then up here we have an octopus. We all have seen an octopus either maybe live at a zoo or aquarium, or even for real if you've been scuba diving or snorkeling. An octopus is a mollusk also with a greatly reduced internal shell like the nudibranch. And octopi are typically really good predators, and they're really smart. They're really good at problem solving. And then finally here we have a terrestrial snail. This one lives on land. They use radulae to scrape food particles from decaying plant matter. Moving on now, switching to phylum Echinodermata. These are the echinoderms. You probably recognize these. You just didn't know they had such a crazy name. They include sea stars, sea urchins, sand dollars, and sea cucumbers. The animals in phylum Echinodermata, which is from the Latin term for spiny skin, have hard outer skeletons. Remember, we're still dealing with invertebrates. They also have a network of tubes in their body called a water vascular system. Echinoderms use this system to help them move. You can go to page 10 in your lesson and see the anatomy of a sea star. And of course, notice that these have radial symmetry. You can see in the sea star here that if you had a point in the middle, you could draw lines out from the center of the sea star. Same thing with this skeleton of the sand dollar, and the same thing with this urchin. Interestingly enough, though, echinoderms tend to get or they can be grouped with animals that have bilateral symmetry versus radial symmetry, because it turns out that as larvae, before their bodies change into a radial shape, as larvae they actually have bilateral symmetry, so sometimes they're grouped with the bilateral animals. You can see here this is a sea cucumber. It's considered a delicacy in parts of the world, and this particular echinoderm can actually turn itself inside out if attacked. Notice if you were going to look at the radial symmetry of this animal, if you drew a line this way it wouldn't look like radial symmetry, but if you drew a circle around the opening here it would have radial symmetry. So that's kind of what you're looking at, a long tube there. And then of course we have a sea star, not a starfish. We try to call these sea stars now because they're not fish. These are some of the best known echinoderms. Like I said, some people call them starfish, but they are actually not fish. This is called the blue sea star, and it's actually sitting on fan coral, which is also an animal. Remember, we're in the animal kingdom. And the next one over is a picture of the skeleton of a sand dollar. You can usually find these on the west coast of Florida. If you put your hand up under the sand, you might find them. The sand dollar looks like a sea star. You can see here in the middle, right? It looks like a sea star with the arms fused together in a circle. And then last but not least down here, this is a sea urchin. These are characterized by long spines, and in many species the spines contain strong poisons that protect this animal from predators. So we'll move on to the arthropod phylum Arthropoda. Arthropods are the most abundant animals on Earth. If you could put all types of animals on Earth into a huge bucket and take out a handful, 3 out of every 4 of those animals would belong to the phylum Arthropoda, which is a huge group that includes lobsters and bumblebees and barnacles and tarantulas. Arthropods live in nearly every habitat on Earth and are important as plant pollinators, sources of food, and serious pests. What do they all have in common? Arthropods have a hard, jointed outer covering called an exoskeleton. An exoskeleton is made of a tough polysaccharide called chitin, just like fungi, right? Their cell walls are made of chitin. Arthropods have a complete digestive system, complex organ systems, and sophisticated behaviors. You can go to page 11 of lesson 307 and look at the anatomy of a grasshopper. So I've switched over here to page 11 of your course, lesson 307. I am not a particular fan of the arthropod phylum, but it is worth taking a look at the anatomy of the grasshopper because it is representative of a lot of insects. It has a compound eye, antennae, a head, a thorax, which is its midsection, and an abdomen, which is the rear section of the body that contains most of its organs. You can see it has jointed appendages, and if you've ever stepped accidentally on a grasshopper or most bugs, they crunch under your feet because they have this exoskeleton or external skeleton made of chitin. Last but not least, today we're going to talk about the Chordata phylum, which is the phylum where you will find all vertebrates. Everything we talked about before this slide were invertebrates. Now we're going to discuss pretty quickly, actually, because you're pretty familiar with vertebrates, but we're going to discuss the vertebrates. People, fish, frogs, birds, and lizards are all vertebrates. Arthropods are the most abundant animal phylum on the earth, but vertebrates are the animals you're most familiar with. Vertebrates are a subset of the animals in the phylum Chordata. So we are chordates, and that means that we have spinal cord, and we are vertebrates because that spinal cord is protected by our spinal column and bone, and we have an internal skeleton. So chordates are characterized again by having a nerve cord that carries information between the brain and other parts of the body. Most chordates have an internal skeleton made of bone or cartilage, like a shark, or both. In addition, chordates have a complete digestive system, and most have a closed circulatory system. Chordates include fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. There is extraordinary diversity in this group of animals. And I'm still in your course, lesson 307, page 12. You can see here we've got a bunch of different chordates, phylum Chordata. These right here, you've got a fish. Fish are a diverse group of vertebrates. They spend their entire life cycle in water and use gills to exchange gas in water. Amphibians, including frogs, toads, and salamanders, they spend at least part of their life cycle in freshwater habitats. Reptiles include turtles, snakes, and lizards. They have waterproof skin and lay eggs with tough protective shells. Birds are vertebrates that have feathers and hollow bones, plus a specialized, highly efficient breathing system. And last but not least, we are in this class here, the Mammalia class. This whale is a mammal. Mammals like us have hair, and females are able to nurse their young with milk produced inside their bodies. And so, in conclusion, animals are multicellular, eukaryotic heterotrophs that don't have cell walls. Kingdom Animalia includes many diverse species that live on land, in freshwater lakes and ponds, in the ocean, and even inside the bodies of other animals. They may look very different from one another, but all animals share a basic set of characteristics. They are multicellular and eukaryotic. They are heterotrophic. They lack cell walls, and they are capable of sexual reproduction.